What's the deal with Secret Wars and RDJ Doctor Doom anyway?
What's the deal?
That's like the #1 question on everybody's mind right now. And in this video, I'm going to go over 3 pieces of information, new reports that are out there. And these reports give us a little bit more insight into what is going on with Secret Wars and the Russo Brothers. What are they cooking up back there? Now, the first thing I want to talk about is an article that was in Empire. I believe this was last week. And I want to read some comments here because it's always interesting when the Russos actually talk about what inspired them to come back, but there's some serious clues here as to what's going on. Endgame was the end, and it took a little time for us to begin to think about it as something other than an end. Anthony Russo tells Empire. They go on to say, we're close with Kevin and Lou D'Esposito and the entire Marvel team, and we've had conversations through the years. We've talked about a lot of ideas. Really, what happened, and they're referencing the actual inspiration for Secret Wars here, was we ended up stumbling upon an idea that activated all of us. You couldn't see it coming until it came. And once it came, it was like, well, that's a story we need to tell. The Russos go on to say there were ideas that we were trying to wrap our heads around that preceded this one. And by this one, they're referencing the big idea that changed everything. But they just never found the story for those other crazy ideas. And then the article says it all gelled when McFeely, that's Steve McFeely, the brother of the McFeely brothers that's coming back with the Russos to write. And it says McFeely hit on how the Secret Wars comic arc might work in the MCU form. And then the Russos say, I remember calling Steve and I said, hey, crazy idea. What do you think if we all go back and do Secret Wars? And then Joe says that Steve was like, no, absolutely no. And then hung up the phone. And the next morning at 7:30, Steve apparently called back and was like, all right, I have an idea. Roll call, let's go. I feel like doing a whole video to kind of break down the status of what this idea was and like how this production is actually going, right? But for now, with the context of this thing from Empire and some of the other stories we're going to talk about in a second, it really does appear that the Russos had different ideas for Secret Wars. And there's a fairly well documented trail of them having this idea, wanting to do this idea, talking to Marvel throughout the years. Like, don't forget that the Russos were talking about Secret Wars during the Endgame promotional tour. Like when they were out there doing the world tour, they were talking about Secret Wars. I say all that to say that there's a long history of them wanting to do Secret Wars, right? They love the Secret Wars comic book, and according to the new article, they have had many different cool ideas for how to do it. But it seems like they were having trouble wrapping their heads around Endgame not being an end, and they had trouble coming up with a good story reason as to why the Secret Wars event would happen. And then Steve McFeely has this idea that like changes everything. It's the impetus for all the things that are now happening, like the Russos actually returning, Marvel being willing to accept their pitch. And we also know from reporting around last July, I believe this came out from Jeff Snyder, that Marvel initially said no to the Russo brothers pitch. So whatever this crazy idea is that McFeely had, the Marvel Studios people were initially resistant to it. And that takes us into the next piece of news here. So it was just announced this week that Michael Waldron's script for Secret Wars has been completely scrapped. That shit's gone. They're not taking anything from Michael. He might still get story credit on the film, but he's not going to get screenplay like written by credit. And instead, McFeely and the Russos are redoing that thing from scratch, which if you think about it kind of makes sense. I mean, this would be why maybe Marvel Studios was resistant to whatever this crazy pitch was. They already had this thing going with Michael Waldron and his ideas of Secret Wars, etc. And so it seems like whatever this crazy idea is that McFeely had, it has redone and reset the Marvel plans completely. So now, even though there are likely elements from Waldron's scripts that will be in the movie, again, these are probably concepts that Marvel told Waldron to include. And so therefore they're important to Kevin Feige. They're important to the company. These are things they want on the screen for this, maybe the biggest Marvel movie ever made. The story parts, the thing that's going to tie all of that craziness together, that is apparently completely changed. Now, I have my own ideas of what this is. I have this theory that Tony Stark was never actually Tony Stark, and he was a Victor Von Doom variant that was adopted by the Starks. And I'll link a video down below, a big video where I explain this entire theory. But I'm also starting to think that this has something to do with Secret Wars itself and potentially a version of the Marvel Universe that existed before the Infinity Saga that is perhaps a more pure or real version of the MCU. And if Doctor Doom and potentially Pedro Pascal's Reed Richards come from that version of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, then this wild story for Secret Wars is basically that the entirety of the Marvel Cinematic Universe up until now has actually been a lie, and it's been impure or tampered with or tarnished in some way, and that's the motivation for Doom to want to set things right. But that's all theory and speculation. The main point, like the things we know for sure, is that Waldron's script has been completely scrapped, that there's this wild idea that McFeely had that activated this whole process. Marvel was initially hesitant to do this wild idea with the Russos, and now they are doing it, okay? And so some people have speculated that this means Secret Wars might get delayed. I think this is possible. I don't think it's going to get delayed out of 2027, but I think it's possible it gets delayed either into the summer or perhaps into the fall. It's just a very important and very ambitious film, and I think Doomsday might be a simpler movie to crack, because Doomsday is kind of a film about establishing RDJ Doctor Doom. What are his motivations? What's he trying to do? And then he's essentially going to beat the current version of the Avengers, and then the multiversal version of the Avengers is going to have to defeat Doom in Secret Wars. Some version of that is what Doomsday is going to be. It essentially has to be, considering all the things we know about Secret Wars, all the stuff that has happened in Marvel Comics, and where the MCU currently is at. So if they nail Doomsday, maybe they can take a little extra time with Secret Wars. I think the fans would wait, especially if it is as epic and grand and just totally goddamn ridiculous as we think it will be. Now, the last piece of information that we recently got all has to do with Doctor Strange 3. So according to Daniel Richtman, Doctor Strange 3 will now shoot in 2026. That means a couple of different things. First of all, it means that the mysterious movie that's shooting this fall is likely not Doctor Strange 3. Even more evidence that that is now going to be World War Hulk, just based on this production leak from Daniel. Another thing this likely means is that Doctor Strange 3 will not take place before Avengers Secret Wars. Now, it could technically still take place before Secret Wars, but if Secret Wars keeps its date of May of 2027, there's a February date that happens right before it, but it's just highly unlikely that Doc Strange 3 would be able to shoot in 2026 and be finished before Secret Wars. Maybe if they delay Secret Wars, which we just talked about, Doctor Strange 3 could fit before the Secret Wars film. But myself and a lot of other people believe this information from Daniel indicates that Doctor Strange 3 will be pushed into the mutant saga. This is another thing that I want to make a full video on, because it's like really cool. Once you appreciate what Marvel's actually doing here, it's like, it's going to give you a lot of confidence going into the mutant saga, as opposed to what happened with Endgame, where it like just felt like an end and then we felt directionless for a while. Marvel's actually cooking to have a mutant movie, an X-Men movie, come out the same year as Secret Wars. So 2027 currently is supposed to be Secret Wars and then X-Men. And if Doctor Strange 3 actually does shoot in 2026, it's very likely it also comes out in 2027, which leads me to believe that the Doctor Strange 3 movie will likely be a film trying to make sense of the new version of the MCU. Because if you didn't know, the rumors indicate that after Avengers Secret Wars, the MCU is going to do a soft reboot. This is likely to just bring X-Men, Fantastic Four, and even Spider-Man more permanently into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It might also be a time where they recast people like Tony Stark and Steve Rogers and just kind of reset the canon a bit. But we're not sure. Some people think it's going to be as though nothing really changed and everything from the Infinity Saga's canon still happened. And this is a recipe for fans to get really confused and kind of mad about the canon. And I think Stephen Strange is the perfect character to help bring the audience into this new version of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And that movie could be sort of used to help explain the differences and get the audience to understand what actually happened and what this new Marvel universe actually looks like. And I think Doctor Strange is going to have a huge arc of story throughout Doomsday, potentially stuff in between Doomsday and Secret Wars, and then ultimately Secret Wars. And I predict that Doctor Strange might be one of the characters that remembers the Secret War and remembers the old version of the Marvel universe. So it would be pretty useful to have a guy like that being one of the first movies in a whole new MCU. So there you have it, guys. Updates about what is happening with Secret Wars. Just kind of want to cue you in on the process the Russos have, the idea that inspired it, the fact that it's going to go completely away from whatever Michael Waldron was working on, and the fact that we have updates for Doctor Strange 3. This movie likely pushed into the mutant saga, which I think is okay, actually. So let me know your thoughts on all the different updates here. And as I always say, I hope you are having an awesome and a nerdy day, and I'll see you in the next video.